We welcome you to the Soccer Media Podcast, our weekly look at the soccer media business and the business of soccer. I'm John Shrader. This time around, we're talking about the World Cup, again from the sort of bookshelf edition of the program. Clemente Lisi is the author of a book that he first published in 2022 and has updated in 2026 for this new World Cup in the USA, Mexico, and Canada. The book is titled The World Cup, A History of the Planet's Biggest Sporting Event, and it's published by Bloomsbury Academic. We've been doing this podcast for about 6 months or so now, and we really appreciate you being with us, watching it, listening to it, finding it wherever you can. And again, we do appreciate that very much. If you could like us, you could subscribe, and maybe you can send us some ideas, interview ideas, and maybe some issues that we can talk about. That would be awesome. Thanks so much for that. Here's our conversation with Clemente Lisi. Every 4 years, it seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and this year it is bigger than ever. And to talk about the World Cup, Clemente Lisi, whose book, The World Cup, A History of the Planet's Biggest Sporting Event, has been updated for 2026, published by Bloomsbury Academic, and he's been kind enough to chat with us on this little podcast. Clemente, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
So the World Cup is a grand ambition in a lot of ways, and I suspect it's a grand ambition to write about. Why did you take on this task not once, but now a second time?
It's a good question, and people were asking me that when I was first telling them 4 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago during the pandemic, I'm going to write a book about the World Cup. They were like, "Well, which one are you going to write about?" I said, "Well, all of them." And people were like, "Oh." So I think some people knew it was very ambitious, and it was. I'm not going to lie. And watching the World Cup is a lot more fun than writing about the World Cup in some ways. But I really enjoyed the research. That was the best part, I think, for me, was researching all the ones prior to my lifetime, the ones I remember. And I can remember back to 1982, but anything before that, I don't remember, or I wasn't born yet. Right. So the researching that part and trying to tell that story and trying to bring those World Cups to life is great. And then the ones in my lifetime, the way I decided to tackle those is I started writing them in the order that I enjoyed the World Cups. So like 86 and 90, the book is chronological, but I did not write it chronologically. I basically started with the parts that I wanted to dive into the most first. And I think if you read the book, you can tell probably which ones I probably enjoyed the most, which ones get more space. But there's a common thread throughout, obviously. The growth of the World Cup coincides with the growth of technology, right? The fact the World Cup was able to grow, not just from this really small tournament, even though it was global, very small tournament, into something that captured the imagination on radio and then television and streaming. And as you said, it gets bigger and bigger all the time.
We're going to talk in a bit about Uruguay, and they're back in the game coming up next time around. But they hosted the first one. But before we get to that, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. What is the most fascinating piece of information, or maybe a couple of things that you learned that you didn't know before and you couldn't wait to tell the world about, that you learned in your research?
Yeah, it's interesting. Part of doing the research is debunking myths. And there's a lot of myths at the World Cup, a lot of mythology that's created much, much later. And for example, Italians all remember or all know that in 1966, North Korea defeated Italy at the World Cup 1-0 on a goal by a player named Pak Do-ik. But there's a rumor or a legend that he was a dentist by trade. Like, this is what he did for a living. It's just not true. And so it's just interesting how in Italian media, you see all the time how this one dentist took down Italy, and just not a fact. I mean, I looked everywhere and it just could not be proven. And so things take on a mythology after the fact. Also, 1950, the idea that the U.S. team that defeated England was mostly made up of players that were born outside the U.S. Also not true. Many of the players were actually born in the United States, right? So these are all things that, digging in, I was able to develop and then it kind of expose in that way. And there's a lot of little tidbits like that's sprinkled around the book. So a lot of what we know today about the World Cup, especially anything that predates maybe 1970, I think a lot of it is entered into mythology. And it was fun to find things and say, you know what, this is not actually what happened. This is what happened. And you mentioned 1930 Uruguay. There's a lot of little things like that around that tournament as well.
I'm curious now. How in the world do you get information that's reliable out of North Korea? How did you confirm that?
It wasn't out of North Korea, it was just out of other English media sources.
Okay, so
So British newspapers have been very good about documenting the World Cup,
okay, so they got
obviously.
it right. The
They got it
Italians
right,
didn't.
and the Italians still don't get it right. If Italy ever talks about the biggest debacles in Italian soccer history, which there's been a lot of recently, they mention 1966 as being one of the biggest, and it is one of the biggest upsets ever in the World Cup. So
Well, this is going to be kind of a touchy subject, considering your heritage, but it's been a tough run for Italy, hasn't it? It's been tough.
it's been very tough, and it's unfortunate because Italy is a four-time World Cup champion. The Italian fans always bring a little extra at the World Cup, and the fact that it was going to be here, a big Italian American community. I think a lot of people remember '94 World Cup and how having Italy there and Ireland and Greece, three countries that are not going to be here, despite the expanded field to 48. It doesn't necessarily mean that getting out of Europe is easier. I think getting out of Europe now has gotten much, much harder to do because the European representation hasn't grown as much as maybe you've seen in North America, Africa, Asia. So, and the Italians have their own issues with player development and their league, and we can have a whole podcast on that. But yeah, it's a big disappointment, and to miss three World Cups in a row now seems almost. I mean, you could never have guessed that. The day after they won the World Cup in 2006 against France on penalties. By the way, that's the last time Italy played a knockout game at the World Cup. If you had said this is the last knockout game Italy will play at a World Cup for like another 20 years, nobody would believe you.
So the last time they were in the World Cup was 2014. They've missed the cycles in 18, 22, and now 26.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. One of the things you have fun with early on in this book is soccer and its place in the world, and you sort of have some fun with this. That maybe you consider that Catholicism and Islam are very large religions, but maybe soccer is the world's greatest religion. Give us a little bit of an idea of how you played around with that.
Yeah, it is the biggest religion in that, there's icons and relics just like in any other religion, but I've been all over the world. I've traveled extensively for work, for the World Cup, and truly it is the one unifier. I think a lot of Americans think soccer is a divisive thing because we see, club fans fighting against each other, say in Turkey or Greece, or we watch the hooligans from the 80s in the UK, and we think, and maybe on the club level, it can be that way. But at the World Cup level, in terms of national pride, it has been, I think, a way to unify the world. And the World Cup every 4 years is kind of this sacred time, that people kind of can't wait for the World Cup. They can't wait to talk about it. They can't wait to enjoy it, to experience it. And if you ever traveled around the world for the World Cup, I mean, if you look at World Cup history, there's been almost zero fan violence. There's been some, but not in a very long time. And so it is the great unifier. And everywhere I go around the world, if I say I go to Argentina and I just say Maradona, Messi, people will just start talking to you. Or if you say Ronaldo in Portugal, or you say Neymar or Pele in Brazil, I mean, I've learned this, if anything, is that any cab driver in the world is a soccer expert. No matter where you go in the world, and you get picked up at the airport, and they ask you inevitably why you're here, what you're doing, and you tell them you're a football fan or you're a football writer, they quickly become pundit, and it becomes kind of like this unifying thing. Even if you speak in broken Spanish or whatever, they speak in broken English, and they quickly they understand the game, they live it. I think cab drivers talk to a lot of people, number one. Number two, they listen to a lot of talk radio, and I think they've become instant pundits. I found that it's almost very interesting to talk to people around the world, and it does unify people, which I think is great. That's why the World Cup is an amazing thing, and also in some cultures allows you to be nationalistic without the problematic parts of it. I mean, I talk about West Germany and Germany post 1990. 2006 World Cup is a good example. Germany hosted the World Cup. A great time and a great place to actually put out a German flag when we know it was a bit taboo in their culture to do so.
So between politics and economics, and sort of internal economics and external politics, and the cost of a plane ticket and the cost of a ticket to a game, we're not going to screw this thing up, are we? We're not going to screw up this thing that's on our platter, just waiting to be called the greatest spectacle in the history of sports.
It's unfortunate that a lot of the pre-tournament hype, the pre-tournament talk has been all about the high ticket prices, and now spilling over into how much it's going to cost you to go to a game. For example, as you may know, New York, New Jersey, to go to the Meadowlands, it will cost you $80 on a bus and $150 on a train. This is kind of unheard of. And you speak to anybody who's covered even one World Cup, and they'll tell you this World Cup feels very different. The lead up, anyway, feels very different than any other one I've ever seen. And that's saying a lot. That's 40 plus years. And so that's number one. And I hope that, it doesn't ruin the tournament, but the World Cup has this knack of being almost too big to fail. And once what happens on the field captivates people, people will kind of forget all about this. At least it will go away temporarily, and people will just fall in love with the games themselves. And this happens over and over again. Every 4 years, we talk about something scandalous in the lead up, and then it quickly just fizzles away.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. I'm probably among the many Americans and maybe other people around the world who got into the ticket buying game early on and realized the price was out of my interest, if not out of my league, and so I'm going to be watching a lot of the World Cup on television. Clemente Lisi is the author of The World Cup, A History of the Planet's Biggest Sporting Event, published by Bloomsbury Academic, and it's available to you now wherever you get your books, right?
Correct.
What is, do you think, the greatest World Cup tournament in history?
So I have a bit of a ranking. I rank 1970 as being the best. That's the one with the great Brazil team, maybe the greatest Brazil team ever. To win and maybe the greatest team ever to win a World Cup.
And this was Pele's third, right?
Pele's third World Cup and his final, and it was played in Mexico, and a truly, truly amazing tournament. And maybe for a tournament to be really good, you need to have that one player that really can drag a team to a World Cup. And in that case, it was Pele. Number two, I would say, again, Mexico, 1986, Argentina, Diego Maradona. That even more so. Single-handedly almost, and I said the word literally, single-handedly won the World Cup for Argentina, basically made the other 10 players look like superstars. And we may never have a tournament like that again, where you have one pivotal figure take on this grandiose role and really drag a team to a tournament. And if you go back and watch his goals and the highlights, I mean, the England-Argentina game alone is worth the whole tournament. And so that's number two. And then number three, I would rank 94, the USA, still the most successful tournament economically, in terms of fan attendance, which says a lot because it was a 2014 tournament at the time, 52 games, not the behemoth. It's double as much now. I think this tournament will eclipse it economically. And then also what we saw on the field. I mean, despite the heat, despite all the issues that playing in midday brought with the World Cup, it was, again, an amazing tournament, and Brazil ultimately won that on penalties against Italy. But we remember, Romario's goals. We remember Roberto Baggio. We remember all these iconic players from the 90s. And, there's a lot of 90s is in vogue again because I think fashion kind of goes in 30-year cycles. So there's interest in the 90s again. And also the U.S. hosting again brings back memories of 94 for a lot of people.
For those who dream, let me remind you, there have been a half a dozen home teams, in the U.S. and Canada and Mexico are the home teams this year. But Uruguay won the first tournament at home in 1930, Italy in the next one in 34, in 1966. England won its World Cup title at home, West Germany in 74, Argentina 78, and France in 98. I think I got those right. So would anybody be putting their money down on the U.S. in 2026?
Some people might put their money on the U.S. Look, the U.S. has a long way to go still, and but as someone was a child in the 80s when the NASL collapsed, to see where we are now as a soccer country, it's massive, and so we can't lose sight of that. I think that's number one. But getting out of the group and actually winning a knockout game, that would be pretty big, and they haven't done that since 2002 when they faced Mexico and South Korea, Japan. So that's the key. Now, unfortunately, getting to a quarterfinal will be much more difficult this time because you have an extra round of games. You have a round of 32 and a round of 16. But even just winning a knockout, getting out of the group, unfortunately, is not good enough anymore, I think. They need to show something more than that. And look, at a World Cup, anything can happen. They're going to be home. You can catch fire. But the lead up to this tournament, the U.S. has not been playing its best soccer, I have to admit. So it's a little bit 50-50 right now.
Just turn it on. No big deal. Just flip the switch. Go for it. Um, when um, when did the World Cup, Clemente, become a truly big deal?
Yeah, I think the key moment is 1966, 1970. Those World Cups were televised widely, and by 1970, pretty much everyone had television. Maybe not color TV, though that World Cup wasn't color, but most people had a television, and that is a game changer because now you have a spectacle that's on the radio, and now it's beamed into homes all around the world. So that became a big deal, being able to watch these games on television. That's the biggest, I think, switch that turns on that makes this a truly global game. And then I will say, when you get to 98, 2002, you have the advent of the internet. Now that's a whole other level of streaming that's gotten better, obviously, as we with every World Cup, to the point where FIFA now has deals with YouTube and TikTok, right? Because they understand the power of beaming into your phone as opposed to watching on TV. People don't even watch things on TV anymore. You mentioned watching the World Cup on TV. Most people are probably watching on their phones. So we see this kind of evolution of technology really spring forward. I'd say it was the late 60s, early 70s. And then by the 90s, the commercialization of the game is massive. 94, the US, that's a big commercial growth for FIFA. And then by 98, you had superstars like David Beckham were known by everybody. I mean, even non-soccer fans knew who Beckham was.
We're in an era when, as you say, the names, the faces, the social media presence is great. Messi and a handful of others, Mbappe. I mean, just go down the list. Ronaldo, down the list of names. But should we now stipulate that Pelé is still the greatest name in the history of World Cup soccer? Not one, not two, but three World Cup titles for Brazil, including that one in 1958 when he was 17 years old.
It's hard to pin this down. People ask this question all the time, like, who's the
Yeah.
best of all time? And of course, I always waver. And I think the three best players in the world are Pele, Maradona, and Messi, and they all play in different eras.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my cop out answer. I've always been a more Maradona over Pele,
Okay.
because of just, I mean, Pele was surrounded by some pretty amazing teammates, and I don't think Maradona ever was. So that's why I give him the edge. Now, for everyone, Messi winning a World Cup was going to get him that status. Now, I understand we all have recency bias. Everyone thinks the last thing they saw is the best. Messi is the best. The best final ever was in 2022. Like, everything is what they last saw. But I do agree that you can pick and choose what you want. If Pele, look, if there's a Mount Rushmore, that gives me four opportunities, right?
There you go.
Pele's there with Maradona, with Messi, and then the fourth one could be Cruyff, Beckenbauer, Ronaldo, R9 Ronaldo, the Cristiano Ronaldo. I mean, that one is up for grabs, I think.
What made the Uruguayans and others think so audaciously that they could create this world football tournament in 1930? Like the next time around, in fact, there are going to be some games in Uruguay very early on to celebrate the 100th anniversary. But the Olympics were just ramping up to be a big deal. The new version of the Olympics in 1896, and then soccer was a sport in the Olympics. And then they said, what the heck? We're the champions here, Uruguay. We'll host this tournament. What made them think they could pull this thing off?
Well, yeah, Jules Rimet, who's the founder of the World Cup, he really thought that this would be a way to bring the world together. The idea that this is a world peace kind of thing. And,
he's a Frenchman.
He's a Frenchman. And like Trump, he was looking for a Nobel Peace Prize, which he never got, like Trump. So it's interesting how people thought soccer could be a vehicle for peace around the world. So the World Cup starts out with this idea. Now, the idea of hosting in Uruguay was kind of a no-brainer, because in 24 and 28, Uruguay had won the gold medal at the Olympics. So they were pretty much the world champions, at least as we know it, because there was no other world competition. Rimet really wanted to have his own thing. He wanted to take the soccer out of the Olympics and do his own thing. So they did host it in 30 in Uruguay. That caused a chilling effect. Obviously, a lot of the European teams did not come over, like England, like Italy. So you had this kind of only a 13-game tournament. Not that many people were there, not that many teams were there, but it was this beginning of something. And by 34, 38, it becomes a bigger deal. And then FIFA goes into this rotation between Latin America and Europe. And the World Cup for many, many decades was really a European South American thing until we get to the 90s, 2000s, and things kind of break through a little bit.
Yeah. You mentioned Trump, and we'll mention Infantino, Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA. And you, I think, more than suggest that the World Cup the Club World Cup that was held in the U.S. was a way to not only prepare for the 26th World Cup here in Canada and Mexico and U.S., but also a way to solidify Infantino's power on top of FIFA. Is that a fair representation of what you were writing about?
Yeah, absolutely. The updated version of this book really delves into how the US got the World Cup along with Mexico and Canada, but also just the last few years under Infantino. It's really been a big consolidation of his power. And he realizes that the only way to really exert power as FIFA president is not just to cozy up to world leaders, but also to generate as much money as possible and then dole part of that money out to the member nations, who will reelect him, because every country gets one vote. Whether you're Italy or Brazil or San Marino or Andorra, they all get one vote. So the key is to dole out as much money you can to each a member confederation, member state. So that's how you get people to vote for you and you stay in power. And so that's why this World Cup has been seen as a money grab. The Club World Cup was this kind of creation out of nowhere. Let's expand this tournament. Let's make this a big deal in an already crowded calendar fixture situation. And because it was to create more money. FIFA's biggest issue is they can't compete year to year with UEFA and the Champions League. The Champions League generates lots and lots of money. And UEFA pretty much has capitalized or taken the market when it comes to club soccer at the highest level. FIFA doesn't have that. So FIFA is trying to get that in addition to the World Cup, obviously. And the World Cup, the FIFA Men's World Cup, generates the most money of any tournament and generates the biggest money for FIFA, but it's only every 4 years. So leading up to this World Cup, there was discussion about having it every 2 years. People did not like that. So I guess the compensation was, okay, we won't have it every 2 years, but we're going to double it in size. It'll be 48 teams. It'll be bigger, 104 games, 5 weeks. It's going to be a behemoth. I just don't know how we're all going to be able to watch this marathon. I mean, I'm sure we'll be captivated, but it'll be interesting to see, is bigger really better?
We are about to find out. I know that the coffers will be better and bigger, and unless they pony up some more money to New Jersey and Massachusetts and some other places, there's going to be some still angry feelings about that. Clemente, what is your history with soccer and with the World Cup?
Yeah, so I grew up. My parents are immigrants from Italy. They moved here in the late '60s, and so as a young child, I grew an affinity for soccer, going to Italy every summer on vacation and just enjoying the game, but also realizing that when you're growing up in the United States, in New York City at the time, in the '80s, there was no soccer. I mean, the Cosmos were long gone by '85. The NASL was dead. All we had was the MISL here, which was kind of a bastardization of soccer, even though I enjoyed it on cable TV at the time, but wasn't
indoor. Yeah.
Indoor soccer.
Yeah.
Right. And then we had, luckily we had Spanish language TV. We had Serie A was at its height, and I got to watch that on Sunday mornings. But it felt very much like I was alone in this kind of bubble world. And I had friends who parents were UN workers, so they were into soccer. But it was really, we played soccer at recess and after school, but it was like we were on this island, it felt like. And, I almost think soccer was a silent majority thing back then, where if you ever interacted with somebody who clearly was not American, had an accent or something, and you mentioned, are you a football fan, a soccer fan? They quickly realized, wow, you had broken the secret code. Like you could talk about soccer, because back then you didn't have the internet. You could only watch a certain number of games. You had to read newspapers and magazines that were in some cases weeks old, maybe months old. So communication didn't facilitate, enjoying soccer. Now the World Cup was a little different because that was a big thing that was televised, even if it was not done great. So that was a big part of my life. It was being a sports fan, but almost having the two sides of a coin. One was for American sports, where you can talk to people about it because it was everywhere. And then the soccer part, which felt kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of situation back then.
I'm going to remember this. I'm going to use this. The title of the book is "Breaking the Secret Code: How Soccer Took Over the World." Do you have some work lined up during the World Cup? You doing some writing, journalism, any of that kind of stuff during the World Cup?
Yeah, so I have my own Substack called Planet Soccer. So I write there almost every other day, every couple of days. So there's always new stuff on there. I hope to write a lot about the World Cup there. And I also have a column on Forbes.com. So I hope to write about the World Cup there as well. And yeah, it's interesting that the amount of information now that you can find at your fingertips about soccer. I mean, we're blessed in America. We get to watch probably more games on streaming every weekend than anywhere in the world. And so I think American soccer fans have gotten much more smarter, more educated about soccer. And I always try to tell people around the world when they say, "Oh, you're American. Americans don't like soccer." And I'm like, look, a lot has changed. What you could say back in the 80s doesn't work anymore. I think we're among the most soccer IQ people in America, is one of the highest in the world, I would say.
You have broken the secret code. That's what it is. Now we're getting there. The name of that Substack again?
Planet Soccer.
Planet Soccer. And one final thought here for you, Clemente, is writing a book is a lot of work. And it's a lot of rewrite. It's writing and rewriting. It's editing. It's all of those things. It's graphics. It's getting permission. I mean, there's just a lot of things involved in writing a book. But when you step back, what is the greatest joy of this process for you?
Yeah, the greatest joy, I think, is talking about the book, like with you, with other people, and seeing people reading the book, because then you realize all that hard work you put into it is out there in the world. It adds to this. If you look on Amazon, there's a plethora of soccer books this spring, which is great. I think more soccer books, the better. And I'm trying to read as many as I can now, because when I read other people's soccer books, I realize the hard work that it took. And writing can be very lonely, but then promoting it or talking about it is a very public facing thing. So that's the part I enjoy, kind of working in obscurity, late hours of the day or early mornings when you're all by yourself. And then the ability to talk to other people about it and seeing people read the book, and it's just it's a long process, but a fun one ultimately.
Well, congratulations, and hope folks enjoy the book. It is titled The World Cup, A History of the Planet's Biggest Sporting Event. It's updated for 2026 tournament, published by Bloomsbury Academic and available where you get your books. And the author's name is Clemente Lisi, and he's been with us on the program. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thanks again to Clemente Lisi and his book, The World Cup, A History of the Planet's Biggest Sporting Event. A new edition, an updated edition for this tournament, published by Bloomsbury Academic. We've had some interesting people on here, I think, during this 6-month run of this. We've had Taylor Twellman and JP Delacamera, Andres Cantor. Just recently, Mike Woitala of Soccer America. Alex Silverman of Sports Business Journal has been with us. Steve Cangelosi, one of the outstanding announcers for soccer in America, Apple TV. Kevin Egan from Apple TV as well. So you can get an entire rundown of what we have and who we chatted with. We're on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. You can find more information about what we do at SchraderMedia.com. That's SchraderMedia.com. You can also find out how to send me a note there as well. And we invite any ideas, we invite any comments, and we'd love it if you liked us and subscribe to us. Again, thanks for being here. I'm John Shrader, and this is the Soccer Media Podcast.